Hi, good morning, everyone. David Cross again. Update 5 on this video. I keep this kind of adding little things to it, but I thought I was at a good point the other day where I could start, breaking this down to an application, and I think now I am, because I think I've achieved some more functionality in this upload capability that I was interested in. So what I wanted to do effectively is, I mentioned previously to be able to take any type of data, whether in CSV or space or whatever that is, upload that based on a string value or file value, have this process parse out that information and dynamically determine IP and MAC and perform those checks, based on what the data looks like itself. So I did that, and I wanted to go through and again and give you an update of what it took to add. It wasn't very much, and then kind of give you a quick example of that. So the first thing I noticed is when I did the export of the data through IPControl is it creates a CSV format, and we store MAC addresses differently. So there's no hyphen or colon. It's all no spaces or anything to it, just contiguous characters. So I needed to add a second format. And then I also wanted and needed to start processing those IP addresses that do not have MAC addresses. So what I'm getting back then in this CSV list is IP address information, some with MAC, some without. So I'm starting to build out the process where I can capture those who are only IP only, no MAC, and then maybe do other checks. Perhaps go out and do an ARP comparison, perhaps just do the IP lookup, which we already have in this case, but do maybe something else that we can determine that value. So effectively what I had to do in this for loop that I'm walking through and comparing the lines, because I'm not introducing any additional headers or capabilities to determine the type of file, I'm dynamically trying to determine this. I just set up basically two variables that are going to split the string coming in either spaces or commas. And it's going to compare the two to see which is greater, and whichever one's greater is going to be the assumed delimiter. And in that case, that delimiter then becomes the array of words, which we're then going to process further so that we can determine whether it's an IP address using our IP match, IP format, regex, or I introduced an else if that as we're comparing out the MAC format also ORs it in either format. So whether MAC format or MAC format 2, and if it needs to replace any additional characters, it tries to do that here then. Now I did see that I had, as I removed this, had to replace this string for the words for the IP format for some reason, so I may have to look back at that again. And then lastly, I'm just going to output this IP only into its own variable that I can later look into as I'm breaking out the addresses and later process that maybe by going out and doing some IP checks or maybe doing some DNS checks or things like that, or something that we can derive the IP information from. So with just those changes, and that's all we really needed there, what I was able then to do is to simply export the IP data, running an export, basically telling it to get all the IP addresses. That then creates a CSV file, which I then catted and stored into a variable called export. And this could be any kind of comma delimited string again, if you have IPs and MAC addresses in that. And then when I have that, I'm going to upload it in my -d variable specifying export to my payload or endpoint, which is ARP upload. And then I'm going to use a JQ command to pull out the individual values into kind of a row value. So I want everything to be displayed kind of as a table. And there you go. So we now have a list of those IP addresses with MACs that we've now been able to look up the vendor and return all of that information back so that we can then process it further or do something with it. Now there might be other checks, and I'm sure again there's going to be update 20 by the time we're done with this, where we're going to introduce IP checks and maybe DNS lookups and other types of external processes that as we're uploading this information we can do other checks, other lookup, other validation. So anyway, that's a quick video. Just want to give you that today, this morning for update 5. And let you know what we've got. And this is still growing, so I plan again to break this out and kind of build on it as a separate program. And one of those things, like I mentioned with the IP, instead of chaining these all together into workflows, potentially having different send commands that if it's IP without a MAC, it'll go run this program. If it's IP with MAC, it'll do this. If it's just MAC, go look up the IP and so forth. So we may have some different routines that we'll have to follow in this process moving forward. And my next video this morning, hopefully I'll get around to, is related to DHCP and Windows 12, Windows 2012 and 2016, and processing that information out so that we can build an IPControl import format and or just pull it out from reviewing capabilities. And this ties back into my DHCP converter program that I won't go into here, but on the next video I'll show you that and we'll go into those details. So if you're interested in DHCP and Windows 2012 and have that need to look into their XML format, nice little video that we can go into to show you how we can do that. So anyway, see you a little bit, and if I don't, I'll talk to you later today.